Hello and welcome. In today's presentation, we're going to be talking about some very interesting topics. So we're going to cover the three macronutrients, which you're going to need to get a little bit of an understanding and basis in to get the concepts of fat adaptation. We're going to talk about some hormones, insulin in particular, which is the primary fat storage hormone in the body. And we're going to explain how to become fat adapted so that you can get the maximum fat burning effect in your body. So we're going to start with what the three macros are. You may have heard this term macros. It's short for macronutrients. So we have three macros. You may have heard of them. We've got protein, fats, and carbohydrates, or carbs for short. So just a basic understanding of them. We're not going to go into too much detail, but we'll go into enough detail so that you can get the concepts that we're going to discuss further on in the presentation. And so firstly, we're going to start with protein. So protein, as you may be aware, it's predominantly found in like animal tissue. So think of things like, just red meat or poultry or fish, eggs to a lesser extent, and dairy, even in nuts and things like that to a lesser extent. And it's critical for building and repairing tissues. So that's why it's always known for, in the bodybuilding world or the strength world, for putting on muscle, we need to eat enough protein. It's also important for lots of other things like hormones and enzymes in the body. It helps to support immune function. But the main thing that we're going to be focusing on is its role in muscle growth and maintenance. Then we're going to talk about fats. So next one, fats are predominantly found in oils. So think about olive oil or different oils like that, coconut oil, butter, avocados, nuts and seeds, fatty fish. They're a lot of the sources of fats. And fats, in comparison to proteins and carbs, fats actually have 9 calories per gram of fat, whereas protein and carbs only have about 4. So fats are very calorie dense, meaning that we can accumulate a lot of calories very easily if we consume too much fat. So there is a sweet spot for the amount of fat that we want to be eating. We're definitely not fat phobic. We certainly want to be eating lots of healthy fats, and that will play into becoming fat adapted and being able to help you actually burn fat. So fats are a little bit of a harder source of energy to burn, and they take a lot more oxygen in the body. Like carbs tend to be, I like to think of them like high octane fuel. They burn really quickly and easily. So it's like if you start a fire, like a campfire, and you've got like the little twigs and they catch on and the leaves and they burn really quickly and fast, but they don't last very long. That's a little bit more like the logs. They take a while to get going, but once you get going, then they can hold that flame for a long period of time and hold that energy for a longer period of time. So they're a lot harder to burn, but they can be very beneficial once we use them as an energy source. They're necessary for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins, the A, D, E, K, essential for cell membrane structure, which is sort of like the outside of the cells of all of your cells in the body. Hormone production, what your cells allow to transport in and out of through that membrane. So they're very, very important. They had a bit of a bad rap, I think, maybe in the 90s. And, as the decades passed, it came to be, the term healthy fats. So when we're talking about healthy fats, we're talking about more unprocessed fats. So not like, you think about your potato cakes or your fish and chips and that oil that they have in the deep fryer. That's a processed fat, a cheap, refined, really unhealthy fat. But when we're talking about some good quality olive oil or coconut oil, some avocado, they're more our healthy fats and they're more whole food, less processed. Then we move on to carbs. As I said, carbs are very easy to burn. They burn quickly, but they also can lead you, if you're just relying on carbs as your energy source, you almost have to drip feed those carbs to yourself and eat them constantly throughout the day. Whereas fat, you don't have to eat as frequently. And that's why we're going to talk about becoming fat adapted so that you can actually tap into your fat stores, which is the name of the game when we're trying to lose body fat. But carbs, they're sources include things like bread, rice, pasta, fruits, vegetable, more plant foods. And there's fast burning carbs and slower burning carbs. So as a general rule, sugars and things that are more processed like bread or pasta, they tend to be faster burning carbs. And these are not great for fat loss, and we'll explain that later on. Whereas when we can have our slower burning carbs like vegetables and things like that, they can release the energy slower and more consistently, so they're a lot healthier. So there's no such thing as an unhealthy macronutrient, whether we're talking about fats, proteins, or carbs. It's just the quality of the actual food that's contained, whether it's a processed food or a whole natural food. So moving on to fat adaptation, which is the name of the game when it comes to becoming, having the ability to be able to tap into your existing fat stores to use them as energy. It seems almost, I guess, a bit confusing when you think you look around. So you go to a shopping center and you see these people that are morbidly obese, that are carrying a huge amount of fat. And if that fat is just energy, I like to think of it like it's almost like movement and exercise debt. So that energy is just waiting to be used for later. And you wonder, why are these people getting hungry all the time, and why are they eating more? Why doesn't their body allow them to know that they've got all this energy waiting to be burned? And that really comes down to the ability of being a dual fuel burner. So as you may have gathered, the two main sources of fuel in the body that we use as energy are either fats or carbs. As I mentioned, carbs burn really easily and quickly. So the body will always preferentially burn the carbs. Fat can be a little bit harder to burn and it requires more oxygenation. So it takes a little bit more work for the body to burn as fat. And particularly if you're eating carbs all the time, your body's just always going to be using those carbs as energy, and it never has an opportunity to tap into the fat stores and use those as energy. And it almost becomes a little bit sluggish in its ability to be able to do that, and it becomes lazy. So when we talk about a good analogy that I can explain this, and I've used this many a times explaining to clients how it works. So if you think of it like this, if you imagine your pockets, like your pants pockets, right? So if you imagine the size of the pants pocket is your carb stores, how much carbs your body can store. So your body is very limited in how much carbs it can actually store. It stores it in like your liver and your muscle tissue, whereas fat is like a backpack. So you think about a huge backpack and imagine that backpack can just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So what happens is when we are eating too many carbs and our pockets fill up with carbs, and we eat more carbs, now our body can't store those carbs because our pockets, our carb stores are already full. So what happens is that it starts to spill over and your body will say, I'm going to store that extra carbs. So if you eat carbs, a whole heap of carbs right now, and you're just sitting, you're not doing anything, you're not running a marathon, you're not highly active, and your carb stores are already full, your body will say, all right, I have nowhere else to store these carbs. My carb stores are topped up. I'm going to need to shuffle them on into my backpack, my fat stores. So your body will convert the carbs into fat and store it as fat in your tissues. So that's a scenario that we want to avoid because that's going to lead to gaining more fat tissue in the body. So if we're trying to become fat adapted and we're trying to lose body fat, the best strategy is to empty those carb pockets out. So we want to have the carb pockets almost completely empty or sort of running up to halfway, but it's never getting up to full. So whenever we have a meal, if we have a certain amount of carbs, then the pockets will never get to the point that they're full and they're overflowing, and we're going to store those carbs into our fat stores. If we run the carb levels at a lower level where the pockets are just about halfway to empty, then we have the ability to eat our carbs, put them in our carb stores so that they're ready to be burnt in our muscle tissue. Our body can liberate that energy very easily, but we're not storing it as fat. So that's I guess, the simplest way of explaining it from a conceptual point of view, where you can sort of get a bit of a visual of things. And we'll explain a little bit more detail in relation to that as we move through the presentation. The other thing I wanted to touch on is micronutrients. So micronutrients are, the things like vitamins and minerals and cofactors, all the things that our body requires for the many different processes that are happening every second of every day. For your heart to beat, for your body to digest food, for your immune system to be working, for your brain to be functioning. These all require micronutrients. So we want to be eating a diet of whole foods. So whole foods are going to be rich in micronutrients. As soon as we start to process foods, so man-made processed foods, will start to destroy those micronutrients that are so important for making our bodies function at their optimal level and allowing us to have vitality and health and just perform at our best, whether it's mentally or physically, emotionally even. How do we teach our bodies to burn fat? So this is a very important question. So the key is that we need to force our body to burn fat. If we drip feed ourselves carbs all the time, and that's what most people in the Western world do. They're constantly eating bread or pasta or other high carbohydrate foods, and they're eating too many carbs. So what happens is, as I said, they're accumulating extra fat tissue because their pockets are full, and every time they eat and they're not using that energy in that exact moment, their body's going to store the excess as fat. Also, when those carb stores are topped up and we've got lots of carbs and our blood sugars, topped up, we're always going to be using that carb preferentially as energy. Now, what we can do is, there's different strategies, there's different things that you can do, but generally, when we eat a lower carb diet and we start to empty those pockets out, and we go through from somewhere between empty to halfway full, we start to force our body. We have moments in time where we force our body to burn fat because we just don't have carbs there to burn. And what happens over time is we make metabolic physiological adaptations in our body and even to our fat tissue, where you might have heard of the term white fat and brown fat. So white fat is like that stubborn fat that just never burns. You just can't get rid of it. Brown fat is fat that burns very easily. So as a general rule, children, young babies, you'll see they get a little bit chubby and then they'll have a growth spurt and they'll use that chubbiness and as energy, and then they'll grow and stretch and then they lose all their body fat. So that's because the fat is brown fat. And what makes it brown is that it's highly dense in mitochondria. Mitochondria are like the little work factories that help us burn energy in our cells. So when we force our body to burn fat, then because we're starving it to some degree of carbohydrates, we allow our body to make those metabolic adaptations, like making more mitochondria in the fat to make it more brown fat rather than white fat, and then it's more easily burnt. Intermittent fasting, which is something that we'll cover in the program. I won't go into too much detail into it, but intermittent fasting is essentially just time-restricted eating. So we're eating in a compressed window of time, and we're allowing our body to have a period of time where we're not eating at all. And that can be helpful for emptying out the pockets so that we have an opportunity to burn fat and our body gets used to burning fat. And again, it makes those metabolic adaptations and it becomes more efficient at burning fat tissue. And another beneficial thing to help us become fat adapted is low intensity exercise in a fasted state. So throughout this program, we're going to be doing a lot of walking. Walking is a very simple thing that we all need to do. It's the primary movement that our bodies are designed to do to get us around. And it's so beneficial for many, many different systems in the body. Just that movement. It's important for the immune system, the lymphatic movement around the body, your circulatory system, so many different things. But when we're talking about burning body fat, it's when we do high intensity exercise, so think about like sprinting 100 meters as fast as you could, then our body needs the energy fast. So it's going to use high octane fuel, carbs, because fat's just not going to provide that energy quick enough. But when we do lower intensity exercise like walking, it allows our body to, especially if we do it in a fasted state. So if you can do it, for instance, in the morning, the first thing in the morning when you haven't eaten anything at all, so you haven't eaten since the night before, you're automatically in a semi-fasted state. That's why they call it break fast for breakfast. If you do that low intensity walking before you've eaten, then it will actually help to tap into the fat stores because you'll have no insulin circulating in your blood. And we'll talk about insulin shortly, which is a hormone, and it's the primary fat storage hormone in the body. So let's talk about insulin. So as I mentioned, insulin, it's the primary fat storage hormone in the body. It stops your body from burning fat, and it also encourages your body to store fat. So when the hormonal influence of what we eat has a big impact, and in particular into our fat burning, and in particular when we're talking about insulin. So think of it like this as a bit of an example. If you were to drink a can of Coke, So can of Coke, that's just pretty much sugar water, right? So sugars, carbohydrates break down into sugars. Now, because the Coke's already in sugar form, you drink that can of Coke, it absorbs rapidly into your bloodstream. So the sugars absorb really quickly. Your body doesn't have to really break it down. It doesn't have to, imagine like if you ate some celery, you have to chew it and break it down. And there's a bit of a digestive process to really unlock the carbs and the sugars out of that. Whereas for the Coke, it just absorbs straight in. So it's almost like a tidal wave of energy, of carbs, of sugars that go straight into your bloodstream. Now, your body has to keep everything in a state of homeostasis, which means it's like a state of constancy. So if we drink this can of Coke, immediately what will happen is our blood sugar will rise really rapidly, and that can be very, very dangerous. So our body will immediately release a whole heap of insulin, and that insulin will take the sugars out of the blood, and then either, if we're running a marathon at that time, start to use it as energy. If we're sedentary and not doing any activity at that moment in time, then it's going to it's going to go into our pockets, our carb stores. If the carb stores are full, it'll go straight into our fat stores. And it will rapidly go into the fat stores because insulin, um, it's a hormone that stops your body from burning fat, and it helps to plug those sugars converted into fats into your cells. So it will stop the process of your body burning fat for the reason that what it's saying is, I've got all this energy. You've just drank the can of Coke, your blood sugar's gone up, your body said, all right, I'm releasing insulin to take that sugar out of my blood, and I've got all this energy right now. So I don't need to burn fat. Turn the fat burning engines off. We've got energy here. So if you are consuming foods that are fast burning carbs in particular, but all carbs to some degree, and you're constantly releasing insulin, then your body will just be in this zone of wanting to store fat and not wanting to burn fat, which is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve if we're trying to lose body fat. So when insulin is low, so if we eat more of a lower carb diet, so insulin is primarily released with carbs, a little bit with protein, not really with fat at all. So if we can control that insulin level by eating more fat, good quality protein, and the right balance of carbs for you. So generally it's going to be a lot lower for the majority of people listening to this than what you're currently consuming. That's going to put our insulin levels really low, and it's going to help our body to burn fat by activating enzyme pathways that allow that to happen. And we're not going to be stuck with all these carbs that we have to burn instead of the fat. So the benefits of being a dual fuel burner, and let's just define again what a dual fuel burner is. So a dual fuel burner is someone that can efficiently burn carbs as well as burn fat. So for majority of people, they're not efficient dual fuel burners. They can easily burn carbs, but their body's very inefficient at burning fat. So once we become an efficient dual fuel burner, the benefits that come from this are that we will get more stable energy. So you'll find that you'll be able to go many hours without eating and still have very stable energy. When you eat a lot of carbs, a very high carbohydrate diet, what tends to happen is you go on a bit of a roller coaster. So the energy you eat, your blood sugar goes high, and then as we mentioned before, insulin gets released. We have a whole heap of energy, but then what happens is quite often we go into reactive hypoglycemia. So we end up going releasing too much insulin because the body wants to get that blood sugar down really quickly back to its baseline homeostatic level because it's dangerous to have it too high. But quite often it will release too much insulin, and then that will leave you with low blood sugar. And then once we get low blood sugar, our energy fades, we will become hungry again. So quite often people that drip feed themselves carbs throughout the day, it's because they go on this roller coaster of having high energy, they eat carbs, they eat carbs, they have high energy, and then they crash after it because the body's released too much insulin, and then the blood sugars go low, and then you feel, you have brain fog, you can't concentrate, your energy's low, and you get hungry again, and then you have to do that cycle again. And you're just going up and down with energy throughout the day. When we become an efficient dual fuel burner and we're able to tap into our fat stores, it's like the analogy that I gave earlier, where if you think about a fire, so if we put the little twigs on and the leaves, they burn really quickly, but they don't last very long. So the fire fizzles out, and then you have to keep feeding those little sticks to keep the fire going. Whereas if we have the big logs, once we can get the logs burning and the coals, that's when we don't have to keep attending to the fire. It will just burn for long periods of time. So it's the same as the fats. Once we can become efficient at burning fat, we don't need to eat constantly, and we can go for longer periods of time without having to eat. And that was personally when I started eating this way, maybe 15 or more years ago. That was the first thing I realized. Wow, I don't need to eat all the time. I'm not getting those headaches from not eating. I'm not getting those, energy dips. I have consistent energy. And it also works in with intermittent fasting if that's something that you choose to do. You have less cravings. You don't crave sugar and high carb foods because, again, those cravings are due to that roller coaster. When we have that crash on the down, then we have cravings and we get hungry, and we have these strong drives in our body. Hunger is a very strong drive. It's hard to battle against hunger. So when we have those strong drives, we generally tend to crave, especially if you're used to eating sugary, high carb foods, that's what you tend to crave. When you're a dual fuel burner and you have stable energy, you have much less cravings. You become desensitized because you're eating less sugar overall. You become less sensitized to the effects of sugar. So if you think of it like this, it's like almost a drug addict. So when a drug addict has a certain amount of drugs, over time they have to increase the amounts to get the same effect. It's similar to sugar. So when you have natural foods in nature are only at a certain level of sweetness, but if you have a can of Coke or something that's like man engineered, the level of sweetness in that is so many orders of magnitude more than what a natural piece of fruit or something like that would be, is that you almost become desensitized, and the fruit doesn't even taste that sweet anymore when you're used to drinking Coke or lollies and things like that. So over time, once you have a bit of time away from those sugary foods, your taste buds will start to recalibrate and resensitize. And when you do have an occasional bit of sweeter fruit, you'll really notice how sweet it tastes. it keeps you satiated. So being a dual fuel burner will help to keep you satiated for longer, as we said. It's like those logs, we don't need to keep feeding the fire with energy and with food. You'll be able to stay much longer and have good, consistent energy, mental clarity. The benefits, it's so liberating because you don't have to constantly be thinking about when your next meal is. It helps to sensitize your cells to the effects of insulin. So as we mentioned before, insulin is our primary fat storage hormone. So when we can sensitize the cells to the effects of insulin, when we're eating sugar all the time and we're constantly dumping insulin into our system, the body almost, and this is what happens when people become type 2 diabetic, their body almost becomes deaf to the sound of insulin. It's like if you've been at a concert, you've been right near the big speaker and it's been blasting in your ears, and then you go outside to the normal world and you can't hear anything because you've been oversensitized with that loud sound. So it's the same with the insulin. When we're constantly eating sugar, releasing that sugar, that insulin all the time in reaction to the sugar, our body needs more and more insulin to have the same effect. But when we have time away from those higher sugar foods and we're eating a more lower carb diet and we're releasing less insulin into our body, then the cells become resensitized again. It's like they get their hearing back and they can hear insulin. The body doesn't need to dump a heap of it to get that same effect. And it can even, becoming a dual fuel burner can even enhance your endurance with physical activity. Because like back in the old days, we always used to talk about carb loading before a marathon. And, even though you use those sugar, there's like little gel things made of sugar that you can have throughout a marathon for people that take that approach to eating and nutrition relating to sports performance and longer distance endurance activities. But there's a big movement now in the lower carb keto world where there's a lot of athletes that are not having to use those at all because they're so efficient at burning fat, they can go hours burning that fat and not having to have as much carbs in their system. We used to it's called hitting the wall. So when you burn through all of your carb stores and you're not a dual fuel burner, you're not fat adapted, you hit the wall. And it's like your body is, when it's used to burning these carbs and it's not an efficient fat burner, you run out of your carbs, and then it's like all of a sudden throughout the event, at a certain point, they feel like a truck's hit them. They just can't get energy, and they just feel so sluggish. Whereas these newer breed of athletes that are becoming dual fuel burners, they don't experience the same effects of that because their body is so efficient at burning fat. So let's talk about becoming fat adapted, because this is essentially what we want our bodies to be doing if we want to be tapping into those fat stores. How long does it take? It's different for different people. And it depends on how aggressively you go into it. People that do keto, which is a very, very, very small amount of carbs each day, they can experience quite drastic effects, from their bodies having to switch to just using fat and not having any carbs there. So it can be a rougher period of time if you do it that way, but the adaptation can be quicker. What I tend to recommend is to do it a little bit slower, and it can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, depending on the person. Some people adapt really, really quickly, but some people take a little bit longer. How do you know when you've become fat adapted? So you'll start to recognize some things. You'll start to feel that you can skip meals more easily. And you're not getting those headaches from not eating for every 2-3 hours. You're not feeling those energy crashes. Your sugar cravings will quite often dissipate, and you're not going to have those carb cravings like you may have had in the past. Fat loss will become a lot easier, which is the name of the game of what we're trying to achieve here. So you'll notice it in your body. Quite often, a lot of people will experience more mental sharpness and clarity. They'll just find that their mind focuses easier and they don't get as hazy in the brain, which can happen when you go through that, again, that roller coaster, when we on that down crash phase where we can get a little bit lethargic and a bit sort of foggy in the brain. And overall, your energy will feel much more stable. So our top tips, 5 top tips, is so when we're going through this process of trying to teach our body to become a better fat burner, I recommend to do it slowly, gradually reduce. You might like to do this in the warm-up week to gradually start to taper down your carbs. If you do it too drastically, you'll quite often experience what some people call the carb flu. You can feel like you're getting sick, and it can be quite a real struggle. You'll have no energy. You'll feel like you've been hit by a truck, and it can be not a very pleasant experience. For some people it doesn't last. Some people don't experience it. A lot of people do, especially if you've had a lot of carbs, and it might pass within a day or two for some people. It might take a week or so, but I recommend to start a little bit slower and sort of just start to get your body used to having less carbs. So gradually do it over that warm-up week. So you're not going to have that drastic effects of getting, starving yourself of carbs and then not being able to burn your fat effectively. But, part of the way that we do become fat adapted is that we are restricting our carbs so that our body is forced to burn the fat. So there's a delicate balance of what level, and it'll be different for all of you. You'll have to just listen to your own body, see how you feel as you go along. And if you start to cut your carbs quite significantly to what you were previously having, and you just feel like you're hitting a wall, then you might like to just add a little bit more carbs and just slow that process down. We want to prioritize having enough protein, which is very important for satiety, as well as all the other effects that we mentioned before. So try and have some sort of protein source centered around each meal. So whether it's some chicken or eggs or fish or some meat. We also want to have healthy fats in each meal as well. They will help for satiety, to keep us full, and they'll help to balance our energy levels. Of course, we're always talking about healthy fats, so whole food sources. Be aware that fats are very rich in energy, as we mentioned. They have more than double the amount of calories that other macronutrients like protein and carbs do. So we don't need to have as much of them. So from a visual perspective, if we're looking at our plate, it's not going to be a large component of what you see. It's going to be a very small component. And I recommend we have, a good portion of protein, because we're doing strength training. As we get older, we need a bit more protein as well to maintain our muscle mass. So find, somewhere around a palm size, give or take. Everyone's individual, so there's no exact measurement for everyone. You have to sort of intuitively work it out. Then we have lots of non-starchy vegetables and some good quality healthy fats. And that will be a good balanced meal. So we want to be doing healthy food swaps. And in our recipe books, we have lots of ideas for this. So we're trying to replace things like bread and pasta and rice and potatoes, those higher starchier foods, with things that are lower in carbs but more non-starchy vegetables. So things like cauliflower rice instead of cauliflower, or zucchini noodles instead of spaghetti noodles, or lots of leafy greens. Lots of green vegetables can be good. They're very low. The beauty of non-starchy vegetables, and you'll see it in the lists when you have a bit of a read over that, is that they have lots of water content. They have lots of micronutrients, which are very important for our overall health, and they have lots of fiber, so they keep us full. So from a food bulk perspective, they fill us up without providing a lot of energy and or carbs, but we have our fat that we're having in the meal to compensate for that. To initially begin with, it might be better not to skip meals, unless you're already doing intermittent fasting and you're comfortable with doing that. And it's very important to stay hydrated. And you may need to make sure that you get adequate, good quality salts as well. So I recommend like an unrefined salt that you can get from like a health food shop. I like to put a little pinch in my water to help to absorb the water, and just to keep my my levels up with that, because quite often it can, when you're cutting down on the carbs, it can create fluid loss, especially initially in the body, because sugars hold a bit of water in your tissues. So, and some of the initial weight loss that you will experience at the start will be a bit of a water loss. So it is important to make sure you're drinking lots of water and having adequate salt together with that, and just managing that you're not getting too many like blood sugar crashes as your body's adjusting. So it might just be a matter of having some adequate snacks. So another 5 tips, as I was just alluding to, being prepared and snacking wisely. So preparation is key. When we're not prepared, that's when we end up getting stuck. We get hungry, and we'll just go for convenience foods. And convenience foods are normally the ones that are high in carbs and sugars and processed foods. So the things that we're trying to avoid. So you might like to prepare by having some boiled eggs at hand, a little bit of cheese, some olives, some nuts, just some healthier options, some whole food options that you can have between meals to keep yourself satiated initially until you start to get fat adapted. Make sure you plan your meals. So this is your main meals, so that they fit in with everything that we're talking about. That's super important. Again, when you're not prepared, that's when we get caught, and that's when you end up reaching for things that are not according to what we're trying to stick with here. Majority of foods out there are not in line with what we're trying to do here. So it does take a little bit of preparation and planning. Be sure to cook more at home. That way you know what's in your food. Often in sauces and pre-made foods, there's hidden sugars and carbs. When you cook it at home, scratch cooking is the key. You know what's in it. Avoid food labels if you can. So if the easiest way to avoid food labels is to eat whole foods that don't have food labels. So things like vegetables and lower sugar fruits and meats and proteins and things like that. If you are eating foods that do have a food label, make sure that you read the labels very carefully and look out for hidden sugars and sneaky carbs that are in there. Things like yogurt, flavored yogurts normally have sugars, or even artificial sweeteners, watching out for those sauces that will have lots of that. And quite often it won't just say sugar in the ingredients. It will say, there's lots of different words that end in OSE. Dextrose, arabinose, maltose, and these are just hidden ways that most people don't realize are sugar. And as I mentioned before, fill your plate with lots of non-starchy vegetables. Things like broccoli, zucchini, leafy greens, celery. Things that will fill you up because they've got lots of fiber, lots of water, very little carbs and calories, and they also help to feed your gut microbes to keep that healthy. And we'll talk about that in a future training. So expect a little bit of a transition period in your body, so be ready for that. As we mentioned, the carb flu, you may feel a bit off for the first week. This is normal. It's just your body shifting to burning fat as a fuel and just persevering a little bit through that. If it gets too intense, then you know you have the option to add a little bit more healthy carbs in there, so you taper it down a little bit if you're really, really struggling. But just remember, as we are adapting, our body will become so much more effective and efficient at burning fat. And if that's what your goal is, that you're wanting to burn fat, just think that this is you're on the winning path. Your body is, each day that it is a little bit challenging is a day that you're getting a step closer to becoming a better fat burner. And stay connected in the group. So in Trainerize, we want you to connect as much as possible in there. If you're struggling, post it in there. If you're going well, post it in there. The group momentum, the support of each other, not only me, Emily, and Haley, but all of us together as a group will help to keep us on track with our eating as well as our exercise. And look, knowledge is power, but applied knowledge. That is the key to learning. When we can learn all the theory in the world, but when we're learning at the same time as applying it and actually doing it, that's when the true learning will be experienced. And just if you are struggling at any point throughout this, just remember why you're doing this. We're trying to take you to the next level of health, of vitality, of a better, healthier weight. We're trying to improve you, and it will take a little bit of effort and it will take a little bit of discomfort, but the benefits are so worth it. And just visualize yourself from the start of the program to the end, what an amazing transformation you're going to have. And believe me, it is so worth it. And the benefits of becoming fat adapted are so worth it as well. It's such a liberating thing, not being handcuffed to having to eat all the time, not being restricted. You're a lot freer in your everyday life. So I'll leave it at that for today. So thank you for watching the presentation, and I look forward to sharing the next educational piece with you.